So hi, I'm Peter Millis, LCSW, President of the Carolinas Group Psychotherapy Society, and I'm talking to Elizabeth Olson and Francis Kaklauskas, who are going to be co-presenting our upcoming workshop, Facilitating Meaningful and Effective Psychotherapy Groups, October 17 and 18. So I wonder if you two could just tell me a little bit about yourselves, whatever seems important to you, education, training, where you're from, where you're going, whatever feels right for you guys.
Well, I think that as humans, we're social creatures. And I think my interest in group came from growing up in New Jersey in a diverse community of descendants of slaves and first-generation immigrants. And each family group and each community group had their own values, communication styles. And it always fascinated me about what helped these various groups function, what helped them collaborate between groups. And so ending up as a group psychotherapist seemed like a natural fit for me. So I got into this field because I got sick of driving a UPS truck and dreaming about boxes. Whatever you think about is what you pay most attention to. So wherever I would go, I'd notice boxes, the size of them, could I carry 2 of them? How much might they weigh? And so I decided that I like people and I like ideas. So I pursued a path of doing group psychotherapy. My experience, I did groups for years in community mental health, meaning with persistent and severe mental illness clients. I did forensic and court-ordered populations, relapse prevention. And then about 7 years ago, after 20 years of practice, I moved to be a professor as my primary profession, although I still have a practice training mainly other group psychotherapists.
Yeah, nice. One quick question. Do you dream of groups now?
Recently, I've been dreaming of COVID with I don't have my mask or other people don't have a mask or they're coming towards us or we're out socializing and then I remember it's COVID. So there's some kind of fear in my mind and I think potentially in the larger world.
Yeah. Thanks. How about you, Elizabeth?
Yeah. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Olson, and I'm a psychologist in private practice here in Boulder, Colorado. And groups have been a part of my work since the beginning, when I started out about 25 years ago. And part of that was probably influence from my husband, Francis. We've been attending the American Group Psychotherapy Association for over 20 years together every year. And group has just been such a rich part of our lives and our practice that I'm very grateful to it. I think it's a really dynamic form of treatment. I think it probably in some ways is even more dynamic than individual psychotherapy, which is why I think it's such an enjoyable modality to work with. I really enjoy it, and I see a lot of people make a lot of changes doing it. So it's probably my favorite time of the week, I would say, when I do my groups, and I love it. So I'm happy to be here and talking about it.
Yeah, thank you. What do you guys think about being online presenters and doing, I guess, online groups? Francis mentioned COVID, so I thought that might be worth asking about.
I think it's a great question. You know, in the first or second week of March, we went ahead and transitioned everything to online through my business. So my business does both psychotherapy, psychodynamic process groups, as well as DBT, more structured kinds of groups. And we switched everything to online. And actually, it's been really okay. People actually really like it. And a couple of my groups have decided that they'd like to stay online. And so it definitely changes things because you don't necessarily have the feel of being in the room with people, but there's also some way where people feel in some ways, I think, even more connected by being able to see everyone so clearly at all times. And I've also found that one of the worries I had was that people wouldn't feel as connected over the screen. But I've actually found that emotion seems to really transmit to people, even if it's on the screen. It feels very full of emotion to me, which I think is a huge piece of how change and process occurs in group.
Yeah, yeah, I found that too. I guess we're so wired for emotionality and relationality that it comes across even across the screen that way.
It
Yeah,
really,
yeah. Francis, you have anything to add to that?
I feel like there's always obstacles to us being close and intimate and in authentic, real relationships with one another. And sometimes even when we sat in the room together, it would feel like everyone was on their own mesa in the Grand Canyon and you couldn't feel connection. And other times we'd feel so close. And I think the screen provides an obstacle. And I think it's kind of symbolic of the obstacles we have in our work and effort to actually be in connection and close to one another. And I agree that there's oftentimes people cry or get angry, and it feels very, very alive often.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Elizabeth mentioned something a minute ago about the idea of more structured groups. And I think she mentioned DBT, and sometimes I can think of addiction groups or themed groups as well. And then there's a more open-ended, I guess, or more unstructured. What words would you guys use? I heard Elizabeth saying psychodynamic process groups. How would you guys describe the difference? This workshop is going to be focusing largely on the latter, if I remember how I said that right, on the psychodynamic process group kind of thing, kind of group. And I wonder how you guys would differentiate that or talk about that a little bit. I think a lot of people in my area are very familiar with more structured groups and maybe a little bit less so to the more open-ended kinds, if that's an okay phrase to use.
I think whenever you get 3 people together or more, we're having a group in some way. So I think the dynamics that come up in these unstructured process groups you're talking about are not dissimilar to what happens in addiction groups or anger management groups or interviewing training groups. And often the difficulties that people get into in their lives are similar to what happens in the group. So I'm thinking of a group I'm doing now where I have someone who's struggling with a bipolar illness and another person who's struggling with addiction. But given their histories of not feeling supported, being very scared to ask for help, hearing what people say as more criticism than support, this is coming up despite them having different issues. And whether the group is structured or unstructured or with a theme, people bring who they are to the group, and that we can work with both the topic of the group, but also kind of people's creating their own social microcosm within the group. And we can help people see that, do it differently in the moment, and then bring that out into their worlds.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Elizabeth, do you have anything to say about that?
what I would say is that I think when groups are less structured, there's more room for transferential relationships to occur. And so when you're allowing things to be unstructured, there's a lot of space for unconscious patterns to get replayed amongst group members. And part of why I think it's such a dynamic form of treatment is that in individual therapy, you just have one transference. But in group, you have multiple transferences that get created. Mm-hmm. So an individual therapist really only gets to see one kind of side of a person. But when you add them into a group, you get to see so much more about how they relate with others in their lives. And it creates a huge opportunity, I feel like, for more change to occur.
So the two of you, as I understand it, work differently. Elizabeth from a largely modern analytic perspective, and Francis from a existentialist, modernist, maybe postmodernist, and maybe neuropsychological perspective. And if I've made a hash of that, please let me know how you guys actually would describe how it is that you work. But what are these differences? How are these things alike? How are they different? How have they informed your work? These perspectives. How can we talk about this without sounding so jargony? I know these are my words, not yours. How do they influence how you guys work? How do these ideas influence how you work?
There's an interesting adage in group psychotherapy that regardless of theoretical orientation, that people eventually kind of work similarly, that the difference is in actual how people as a leader behave in a group is much less as people move on in their careers. So, I think these topics that sometimes don't get discussed in some groups of meaning, life purpose, are important to explore. Identity, and then I like all the various theories, and I think of Deleuze, who's a postmodernist, would say these are all wonderful stories of how we work in the world. So when I sit with clients, I might think about object relations or existentialism, and try to think what may be helpful at this time for the group and for the client. So not being limited by just one set of interventions.
Yeah, thanks. Elizabeth?
I think I would say that my work is definitely heavily influenced by modern psychoanalysis. And I would say that I definitely have evolved, or it's been transformed in some ways where I feel like I'm definitely not a strict modern analyst. I don't like things that feel formulaic or like you have to do it in this particular way or say this particular thing. I think it's good to allow there to be some naturalness and organicity. And I think it's also really important that the group leader be themselves in the room, however they are, so that the modality isn't running the person, but the person is kind of drawing on a variety of different ways of working. And I would say that the ways that I work are probably similar to modern psychoanalysis in the sense that I think immediacy is really important, here and now, which I know comes in some ways from interpersonal and Yalom actually, but I think that emotional communication is really important, and I also think it's really valuable for people to study the ways that they get induced by each other in the group, to be able to understand the kinds of feelings that get elicited in other group members, because I think that gives a lot of information about how people are inducing others out in the world. And what's different about group than just a social interaction out in the world is that you get to learn about yourself. It's an opportunity to really understand, how am I coming across with other people? What kind of trouble do I make for myself? What are the repetitions that I play out that you may not be conscious about, or you may even be conscious about but not able to change? And one of the things that I think group is so potent for is that it gives you sort of a playground to be able to enact these things and have new experiences occur. It's an opportunity to try on doing things in a different way that you don't necessarily get out in the world. And so it creates an environment where I think real change can occur because people are practicing, they're putting into motion the things that they want to work on.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks. Thanks. I guess lastly, to avoid taking your entire day, I'm wondering what it's like to be married co-presenters. I mean, there are all these memes about working with your spouse or partner and like that. And I'm just wondering what it's like to be two people in the same profession, working in, I suppose, many of the same ways or areas, and then to be presenting or running groups as a couple. I know you guys are right now in the middle of doing an AGPA institute where the group is being co-led by both of you. And I've seen you both work at AGPA as well in one of your institutes there, where you're both working together. What do you have to say about that? About working as a married couple?
Well, I think group psychotherapy is a path towards emotional maturity. And I think marriage can be that. And I think work relationships can be that. So how do people learn to collaborate how do people learn to be themselves. And I think that in some ways, the biggest compliment we received was when we were getting our doctorates together. The head of the program said, we were worried about accepting a married couple in, that one would be dominating the other, or there'd be a tight subgroup that we would try to influence the rest of the group by our connection. And the chair said that he found it shocking how much we are both just ourselves and allow one another just to be ourselves. So I think in some way this is the journey of group also. How do people get in touch with who they are, be who they are, but also be in a relationship and be collaborative with one another. I think it's interesting being a married couple that the projections about people's families can be so strong, as it often is in any kind of co-leadership situation, where some group members will see me as the patriarchal domineering fathers. Some people will say that I'm way too passive. And then people have a whole series of ideas about Elizabeth and our relationship. And what's wonderful about group, it's so humbling that you get to see the lens that you bring to the world. And then in group, you see how people have different lenses, and it makes you reconsider what you know and what you don't know.
Yeah, so a really fertile area, I guess, for workshop attendees or patients or whatever the word would be, to work in some of that transferential arenas and stuff. That sounds really, really cool. How are you, Elizabeth? What were you going to say? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, it's good. I think it's a good conversation. What's coming into my mind is I'm thinking about co-leadership in general, and how it's really important in the co-leadership relationship to be able to talk about anything that comes up, because the better the relationship is between the co-leaders, the more fruitful I think it is for the group. If there are things between the co-leaders that aren't getting said, that can have an influence on the group. And the group can also influence the co-leader relationship, and sometimes induce co-leaders into tension or into difficulties, or all kinds of different things. And so for me, I have to say, I wouldn't want to run a group with anyone else after I've run a group with Francis. It is incredibly enjoyable for me that I have a husband and a partner and a co-worker that I feel like I could say anything to. And there have been moments where it's really hard and really difficult, because there's difficult feelings coming up from the group, and some way that I feel like it might be getting enacted between the two of us. But I feel like we have really good supervision, and we have learned so much, I think, in this process, and also being respectful of each other's styles and giving space to the other person to be able to be who they are. But I think it's been a really potent thing. I've learned a lot about myself as a group leader by working with Francis. He's taught me a lot. And I just feel grateful that we have the kind of relationship where we could really talk things through and make it, I think, therefore much more rich for the group. Because if we can really say whatever we need to each other, we can then bring it back into the group in a different way that I think is really effective and rich.
Yeah.
Each group member would like us to be just enact in just this exact similar way as their parents did in some way. And
Right.
The poles of enactment can be really strong.
Yes.
But I think we're maybe unique in that we've been in with the same analyst for more than 25 years. So there's no secrets in our marriage. Our analyst knows everything. We've also studied with the same supervisor for more than 25 years, and actually are in a group together.
Wow.
Currently.
Mm-hmm.
So. And we've been together 29 years, and we're going to give it one more year to see if we can make it work. We think this will be the magic year.
I don't know what to say to that. I suppose there was one line, somebody in analysis for a long time said they were going to give it one more year and then they were going to go to Lourdes, right, is the joke, right?
I feel no, it's been really good to do it together and real. It's very real and genuine, and I feel like it brings a depth to the group process that we're working with because I think we're just real. We're who we are, and that comes through, I think, in the group.
Yeah. I think in terms of training group psychotherapists, which we have done running the group psychotherapy training program at University of Colorado for years, the people who are learning from us get to see each of our style, and they may say, oh, I want to do this, that Elizabeth does, but not that, and same thing with me. And it kind of expands the possibilities of how you can be as a group leader.
Yeah.
By seeing multiple leadership styles.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you two feel like adding? Or does this feel like enough to you guys?
I think we're really excited about it. We both know some people in that area, and it seems like there's very dedicated, caring, thoughtful clinicians there. And we're looking forward to engaging and sharing what we have to share and dialoguing and having an enjoyable learning experience.
Yeah. Well, I know I am too. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, say that again?
I said I feel the same way. I think that's really well said.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you two very much.
We're looking forward.
We'll see you in a month and a half or something.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you, Peter.
Bye, Peter. Bye, everyone.